I'm assuming everybody can hear me. We're going to get started. I know people are still coming in, but we've got some people that are on a tight schedule, and we have a full program, and we want to honor your time. So we're going to do everything we can to stick to that schedule. I want to start off by saying some thank yous to settle us in and to maybe appreciate some of the effort and some of the thinking that went into an event like this, and sort of pull our community together in this thing called the League of Quiet Skies Voters, which I'll talk about a little bit. But before we get started, I want to do a few shout-outs, and I do think this is important because a lot of effort, with the ginormous budget that we have to pull this off, a lot of effort from a lot of volunteers, and I'm not going to name them. I'll be in trouble. It's like an Oscar speech where you forget to name people. But we have a lot of volunteers who dedicated a lot of time to make this happen. You will meet some of them later in the panel if you don't already know them and whatnot. But if you see a volunteer and you realize they're a volunteer and you got something out of the program, please take a moment to thank them for the effort. People out at the tables that are talking about their groups, please thank them. Second, I want to thank citizens, ordinary citizens, residents, homeowners and business owners who picked up from whatever source, the blogs or whatnot, that this event was tonight, and they decided to be here instead of somewhere else. It's a big sacrifice. Your time is everything. It's time for family, it's time from work, it's time from just fun, it's time from catching up on Game of Thrones. So we're glad that you're here and you spend a couple hours with us. I also want to thank elected officials, and there's this thing about thanking elected officials at events like this. It's sort of mandatory. It's rote. It's like we have to thank the elected officials, and I want to say that I think tonight it's more than that, because our airport neighborhood communities, led by our local city governments, are stronger together as we address thorny issues. And we are weaker apart. And I think a strong presence here by our city governments is very meaningful in terms of as we address these issues as a collective. And it's very meaningful in terms of exhibiting leadership. So I'm going to fly through this Oscar thanks list because we have a lot of officials from our city governments that have chosen to take away from all the meetings and all the things they already have to do to be here with us tonight. But I'm going to start with, and this is the list in the order handed to me, I'm going to start with the city of Des Moines. And I'm just going to run through this list. And when we're done, I would hope that we would applaud that we have this much support from our local government. City of Des Moines, we have the mayor, Matt Pina. We have Vic Pennington, our deputy mayor. We have the entire council, I believe. We have Rob Back, Louisa Banks, Tracy Buxton, Jeremy Nutting, and Matt Mahoney. We also have about a dozen senior staff from the city of Des Moines who joined us tonight. We have Michael Mathias, the city manager, Dan Brewer, Susan Cesar, Tim George, Ken Thomas, our chief, Beth Ann Rowe. I'm sorry, I just had to get the right part of my lighting glasses on that. We have Scott Wilkins, we have Bonnie Wilkins, we have Andrew Merges, we have Anthony Hampstead, our wonderful legislative advocate, and Justin Kripe from our law enforcement. So a big presence from Des Moines. From Buren, we should have the mayor, Jimmy Modick, in the house. We have the deputy mayor, Austin Bell. We have council member Bob Edgar. We have city manager Brian Wilson. From Normandy Park, we have the mayor, Jonathan Chiquette. We have Mark Hoppin, the city manager. We have Ernest Thompson from the Planning Commission. That's a good list so far, and it's still going. From Federal Way, we should have Susan Honda, deputy mayor, and Mark Copang. We have Jesse Johnson, council member. And Mark is a council member as well. We have Lydia Asila Dawson, our council member, and we have Bill Vadio from the staff. From CTAC, we have Clyde Hill, our deputy mayor. We have Peter Kwan from the council. We have Joe Wachtel from the council. And we also have 4 Port of Seattle commissioners, which I'm delighted for that participation. We are, and I can't see and confirm, but these are the people who said they would be here in this whole list: Commissioner Courtney Gregoire, Ryan Calkins, Fred Feldman, and Peter Steinbrock. That is a nice turnout for an event on this subject matter. So we very much appreciate it. Yeah, let's give them a hand. It is important to have you all in this room this evening. This is an important topic. We also have this program, courtesy of the B-Town blog, South King Media, on Facebook Live. And I wanted to say a personal hello to our good friends at Thurgood Marshall, Baltimore Washington International Airport, who we know are tuning into this tonight. And there are other groups around the country who are tuning into this program tonight. And one of the great uses of social media, with all the bad uses, is what we're doing tonight. We appreciate that you're watching. Some housekeeping. Tonight's program, you should all have a program. You should know that we're going to do a little Aviation 101. We're going to have our keynote speaker, our Congressman Adam Smith. We're going to have the inventor of the Air Noise I/O app, Chris McCann. We're going to have a wonderful presentation on the World Health Organization report. And we should be finishing off, fingers crossed, because we're in the heat of the state legislative session and things are flying down in Olympia. Mike Pellicciati is going to race up here and speak to us as what's happening in Olympia. So it's a very exciting program. Following that, we'll pull some tables out. We'll have a panel Q&A with leaders of a number of our groups that help pull this together. And you all have received pencils and a 3x5 card. If you have questions that are coming up during the night, we'll do our best to be answering them in the panel format, and we'll have someone come around with a basket, and hopefully it'll be obvious, and you can drop questions in there, and we can get through what we can in our half hour at the end for the Q&A. And of course, with candidate forums, the purpose of this is candidate forums down the road, at least one for the primary on June 15th, and one for the general on September 19th, and there'll be lots of information coming after today. So I want to give you a little origin story. It's Avengers weekend, right? And if you're into these movies, everything's an origin story. I want to give you a little origin story because a lot of you know me, but a lot of you don't. And I think it's important when someone tries to come and tell you something about your community and what's happening to you and blah, 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 a little bit about their perspective so you can evaluate and give it weight and give it measure. And so I'll tell you a little bit about me. I grew up in Des Moines. I was born here. I lived on North Hill the first 12 years of my life, moved to Normandy Park as my parents moved. On North Hill, I went to North Hill Elementary, I went to Olympic Junior High, I went to Mountain Air High School. Still go to Southminster Presbyterian Church on North Hill. And so I'm from here, went away to school at Washington State, went to law school at the University of Washington, moved back to Des Moines. And I've lived in Des Moines ever since. So that's kind of my bona fides from being from the area. A couple things that are interesting and I think explain why I might be here in front of you. And one is, I call it my Superfund decade. As a lawyer, early in my career, I was a litigator. And in the 90s, there was a lot of enforcement of what we called Superfund sites. And these were the most polluted, toxic sites in the country, if not the world. And there was a lot of litigation about big companies and government, everybody swapping money about who was going to pay for it. Kind of an ugly thing. Lawyers made a lot of money. Some things got cleaned up. But I learned a lot in that decade about what happens when government and industry and community kind of push back against the tipping point of when we can't all just keep going. We have to be more realistic about the sandbox that we might play in. I learned an awful lot about what happens when we push beyond that without really bringing everyone to the table to find solutions. And it always ends badly. That's the takeaway I had. Next takeaway is I have two big C's. Everybody knows the big C is cancer. In 2010, I was diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma. In 2015, I was diagnosed with AML leukemia. Each of those cancers ended up with lots of chemotherapy. Each of those cancers ended up with stem cell transplants. The last one, the AML leukemia stem cell transplant, was in 2016, and I spent 100 days up at Fred Hutchinson, because it's kind of you have to be there every day, and Seattle Cancer Care Alliance. And I came home after that 100 days. And my wife will tell you, one of the first things I said, after crying and being so happy to be home, and to have had a good experience, was, where did all these airplanes come from? True story. And it was like I had been the frog in the boiling water, but I'd been removed, and then I was dropped back in, and it was hot, and I knew it. And so that's what kind of absence makes the noise grow louder. It brought me to this, and the first thing I connected to 2 years ago was this thing called Quiet Skies Puget Sound, founded by Sheila Brush. and started learning about this. And then I started learning about other organizations in the community. Quiet Skies Coalition out of Burien, Larry Cripe, and Debbie Wagner, and the litigation that they have and are continuing with the Federal Aviation Administration and the good work they're doing. And citizens out of Federal Way, the Federal Way Airplane Noise and Health Coalition, who are dealing with these issues, and realize there's a little ecosystem out here of citizens coming together to deal with issues. I eventually started a project called the Briefing Project, which we're not going to talk about tonight. You're going to see a little bit about it, but it was a way for me to engage in some individual civic activism in the same arena, dealing with aviation impacts. And then you start realizing that ecosystem grew in the last 2 years. And all of a sudden we have these great advisory committees that have been formed by cities who are really paying attention. We have the Des Moines Aviation Advisory Committee. We have a great Burien Aviation Committee. And then you started seeing legislation coming down the pipe, where we had the Department of Commerce we passed legislation for an aviation impact study. And that's got really exciting. And then all of a sudden we saw some federal legislation coming down the pike. An aviation impacted communities bill. We'll hear more about that. And then we saw the ultrafine particle study come out of the state government and the University of Washington. And you see this ecosystem, this mosaic, this quilt coming together. A lot of different groups, but coming together on the same issue. We are blessed that we have hyperlocal media, South Key Media, the blogs, that actually find this newsworthy. And when things are happening, they keep putting it out there. We're very fortunate for that. So as we went forward, these central groups, these coalitions in the middle, were like, how do we take another step? And it seemed like the natural step was to get active on an electoral basis. Turn this knowledge into some action in other realms that we hadn't before. So we've created the Quiet Skies Voters. Our mission, the League of Quiet Skies Voters, seeks to empower voters in the shadow of the 8th busiest airport in the United States with information about aviation impacts to human health, and have our voices heard and cause change. We embrace the concept and the phrase quality of life. We don't run from it. We don't think it's too ambiguous or vague. Quality of life is why we're here in Puget Sound. That's why we live in these communities. It includes our health, it includes our environment, it includes our property values, our safety, our social, economic, and environmental justice concerns. Our goal is to elevate, key word, elevate in this election cycle, during which our port of Seattle is actively moving forward with expansion plans. We think it's critical to elevate aviation expansion to the front line of the election. We are independent. This league is nonpartisan. We're not going to support or oppose a candidate. We're going to provide information as reliable as we can make it so you can make good decisions to decide which candidates will best meet our community's needs. So my job is to do a quick Aviation 101. Usually goes on for an hour. Not going to go on for an hour. I'm going to give you a piece of it. If your communities want to hear the whole thing, we can arrange for that later. And when we start these talks, we want to give you foundation so that, it's like, are we crazy? What we think we're seeing and hearing. And we want to know, how bad is it really? How bad will it get? We talk about, are we alone or are we in with a bunch of other cities and other groups around the globe? And what do we do about it? So, again, are we crazy? Are we experiencing? Here's the question I get all the time. It's like, are there really more planes or am I just making that up? Are there lower planes? Are they on different flight paths? Are there more overnight? Or is the third runway being used more than they used to be? It just seems like that's all worse than it ever was. And the answer is, of course, you're not crazy. And all of those observations are accurate. Here are the numbers right now. In the past 5 years, we've gone from 317,000 annual flights to 438,000 annual flights. That's another 121,000 flight increase annually every year over our heads. 1,200 flights now every day. That's 332 more flights than we used to have 5 years ago every day. You're smart people. You can start figuring out how many that is per hour. That's 50 an hour. That's one every 1.1 minute, 12 seconds. And it's worse than that because they don't just spread out either. We have rush hour. And at rush hour, we know it's more frequently than that. We also know, let's say, for example, the third runway. Yes, the usage has doubled in the last 4 years. Originally, you all remember we had a limited use commitment. At least that was the understanding from the community's perspective. We've seen a 300% increase in usage since 2014, 600% since 2011, gone from 10,000 to 60,000 flights, 173 extra landings per day, and this is all before this anticipated growth we'll touch on. And yes, they come out at night in a way that they never did before. Not going to run through that. That's just a typical night of flights over your house. Are they lower? The answer is yes. One of the things we discovered in the last 2 years is that we've been told for a very, very long time that our planes landed at a 3.0 glide angle, and that's the international norm. And what we discovered more recently, as it turns out, on the biggest runway, runway number 1, they've been coming in at 2.75, below international standards. So those are lower than the typical 3, and that's a problem. We're also ignoring the obvious that if you increase your flights by 100,000 a year, and there's variations in how they come in, some come in high, low, they're never on the straight path. You're, by definition, law of physics, mathematical property, more of those planes at 10% come in low, well, you've got another 1,000, you've got another 10% of that 100,000 coming in lower than you were used to. And so what's the narrative? What's the narrative? What's the responses? Typically it's, well, 65 decibel averages is what we need to pay attention to. That's the federal standard. We're also told that so for below 65, we're not going to worry about it. There's no federal money. We're living with it. And that's that circle there on the map around the airport that I showed you is 65 decibels. We're also told that planes are quieter today. We're also told, and it's true, planes are quieter today. There's just so many more of them, right? That's the problem. And we're also told that something called next-gen and technology is somehow going to make this better. And when you look at this and you really think it through, some of the data that is available to us from the port, from the federal government and studies, is we start realizing what this really means. When they last did what's called a Part 150, which I think was in 2013, they were estimating forward into time how much time every day you would have noise above 60, an average 65 dB. In 2018, they were estimating at Mount Rainier High School, for example, 120 minutes a day, 2 hours out of the day, 2 hours above the 65 dBL. Highline College was 90. At 272nd and Federal Way, it was still 60 minutes. What we know about the 2018 estimates is that we actually have many more planes than they thought we would have in 2018. Similar when we talk about the number of flights above that 65 DNL. And these numbers are big. At Mount Rainier High School, 300 flights every day above that 65 DNL. And so on and so on. So you would say, oh, okay, well, what's the big deal? And if we had had this talk 6 months ago, I'd have gone through this slide and shown you all these studies from the last 5 years about how noise hurts us. It's not an annoyance issue. You know, your spouse doesn't care, you care, it's an annoyance issue. It's not an annoyance issue, it's a health issue. And all these studies talk to that, and then what happened is this. In October of 2018, what happened is the World Health Organization issued environmental noise guidelines. And these are applicable to the planet. It comes out of the European region, but it says on the face applicable to the planet. This is a study of all the studies since 2009. This is evidence-based and peer-reviewed, and there's a special section on aircraft noise. And what it says is this. We have new benchmarks, that's their word, benchmarks. Not 65, 45. And at night it should be 40. The rating they give this recommendation is strong. That means something to the World Health Organization. A strong rating is defined as make policy now to address this issue. The World Health Organization lists the evidence that aircraft noise causes high blood pressure, hypertension, heart disease, heart attacks. It can affect children's cognition and health, and the impacts are worse at night. So, you got to scratch your head and say, we must be doing this. This was 6 months ago. Things must be happening. If you go, for example, unfortunately it's not. If you go, for example, to the port's website today, it's very robust, and you do a search, as I did yesterday for World Health Organization, you will see no results. It is not spoken of on the website. Now, if you go to Google and you say, let's do Port of Seattle, World Health, and noise, just to see that something's on the website, but it's been discussed, and there are no relevant hits. Now, just to show you that when there is something that is worthy of discussion, I guess from the port, it shows up. If we look at climate change, they're great on climate change. And there are tons of results of stories on climate change at the port website. There are tons of results and stories on recycling at the website. There are even tons of results on saving kelp beds at the port's website. All very worthy causes, but you might be scratching your head and saying, where is the noise? And we don't know. So maybe you move on and say, okay, what about noise? Let's talk about pollution. And you would say, you might take the journey I took 2 years ago. Very first thing I looked at was something called the EJ screen. It's an EPA tool. It's online. You can go home tonight, Google EJ screen, pull it up, and do this yourself. And basically, it's the EPA's data collection of pollutants across the country and things that those pollutants we have concerns about, and actually rates any spot on the planet, any spot in the country that you put an X, it will tell you what your risk is on a percentile basis of something. Right? So you want to be in the lower percent, you want to be like in the 50% or lower risk of cancer, or 50% or lower percentile risk of breathing issues, right? You want to be at 50% or lower would be better. You don't want to be high. So, for example, I did a talk in Des Moines, and we did Highline College, and I put a pin in Highline College. You probably can't see it, but it's a pin in Highline College on the map. We do the search, and oh, by the way, this is definitely takes into account the National Air Toxins Assessment data. So we're talking about air toxins, and they're specifically talking about the issues relating to airports being problematic. So they're wanting us to look at this. This is not diagnostic. It's to tell us, gee, there might be a problem. Let's take the next step. So what happens when we look at Highline College? When we look at Highline College, which is right under the flight path, Highline College pencils out at 95 to 100 percentile. Highest percentile in the nation, risk of cancer, and 95 to 100 percentile. Highest percentile in the nation, risk of respiratory hazard. I can bet you that if I had done the same pinpoint here, we'd have the same numbers. And if you decide to go outside the flight paths, you'll find those numbers start to drop. And you can draw some of your own conclusions about whether we should spend some more time studying pollution. So maybe you do that, and you go start studying pollution. You start looking for old studies. You can find old studies in the state of Washington, 10 years old, 20 years old, where we're talking about higher rates of all kinds of problems in the airport neighbor communities. And you can say, yeah, but those are old studies. Are we sure they're good studies? And you can start looking at more recent studies, and you would find, yeah, we're still finding lots of associations with all kinds of health problems as a result of pollution. We can't prove causation, but we can sure look at association and say, we have this and we have that, and they're together, and they're in this location, and we should worry about it. And if you really start drilling in and start paying a fee so you can get research services, you'll find even more recent studies that are saying the same thing. So why worry? What are the big questions? The big questions we are asking is, what is that soot? Soot. What is that soot? What is that stuff deposited on our patios and our cars and our windowsills? And do aircraft emissions and engine residues, if it falls down, if I breathe it in, does it attack my bone marrow? Does it affect my immune system? Is it going to cause me respiratory problems? Is it going to cause me cardiac problems? Will it cause cancer? And so we worry. How does this stuff get in our bodies? And what about the stuff we can't see? We worry about something called ultrafines. That's not the Urban Dictionary of a Hollywood celebrity who's really good looking. But it should be, right? Be better. Ultrafine. Ultrafines. And you'll be pleased to know that we're in the middle, or maybe near the end, of a study by the University of Washington, funded by the state of Washington and others, to study ultrafine particles near SeaTac Airport, to find out about where these particles are coming from, where they're being deposited. And they gave their most recent update to the city of Federal Way on April 1st. And ultrafine, by the way, is really ultrafine. I mean, that's a human hair in that picture, right? That's a fine piece of sand particle. Probably they recognize that as from like Redondo Beach in the south part of Des Moines. It's a really good looking piece of sand. Lots of those down there. But you have human hair, and then you realize how small, when you go into those smaller particle blow-ups, how small and then small and then small. Really, really tiny. And right now, and they haven't confirmed, they haven't issued the final report of the study, but what they shared on April 1st was a bunch of information that they have, and you can see, it's kind of hard to tell, but what they've done here on this particular graph is they put an airplane that is landing to the north, right? So the winds are coming from the north, and so that airplane is sitting right on top of the airport. And you can see behind that airplane all those little dots, and those little dots are reflecting data collection sites for ultrafines. And you can see the trail of ultrafines from that landing airplane. And to the right of it, and I'll go and blow it up a little bit here, to the right of it you can see where they're projecting what they refer to as a plume. Kind of a scary word whenever you hear plume. It makes you think of Aaron Brockovich, right? But a plume means sort of, where is this pattern? Where's this pattern coming from? What do we think and predict it might be? And obviously it doesn't take a lot to at least be concerned that ultrafines are in a plume beneath these flight paths, as illustrated in this report, which is yet to be confirmed, and we're excited to get to the end of it. So, how bad will it get? Well, this part is no mystery. We know. The 1-2 punch here right now is that we have what's called a Century Agenda. The Port of Seattle has a vision about our lives into the flight path, and they've published it. And second, they have something called the Sustainable Airport Master Plan, which is the device to implement at least phase 1 of the Century Agenda. In that Century Agenda, it will, how bad will it get? The current plan has remained triple cargo volume, double the number of international flights and destinations. Also, simply to state, for the next 25 years, handle all the region's aviation needs at SeaTac Airport. That adds up to approximately, by their numbers, at least 80,000 more flights above the flights that we already have. When you start putting that together, oh, by the way, if you read the Century Agenda, there's nothing in there about noise, human health, and what's going to happen to sustain the human species below the flight path. When you put all that together with the SAMP, the mechanic, the moonshot is up to almost 500,000 flights on an annual basis. 1,360 a day, 75 an hour, 1.3 every minute, adding a new 80,000. If you couple that last 5 years that I showed you with this new expansion, you're talking approximately 200,000 more flights. That's the size of San Diego International. It's roughly the size of Thurgood Marshall, Baltimore, Washington. It's really not just, oh, you're adding some flights. You're the Avengers. You're picking up the entire airport. You're lifting it, and you're moving it, and you're dropping it on top of SeaTac. That's the kind of growth we're looking at. So, there's lots of good news from the port. So it sounds like I'm bashing the port. Port and I tango on occasion. But I want to say there's good things happening. There's money being spent for assessing over the next 5 years issues that the communities need. They're going to put up to $2 million a year for those 5 years. We're getting an audit of historical mitigation expenditures. And obviously they're a tremendous economic engine. The port has lent its support to siting a new primary aviation airport. That's a big shift. You're going to hear more about that from Mike Pelliciotti. And it's those are good things. The questions that bounce back from those good things are, is minimum, but in doing those things, is minimum regulatory compliance, is sticking with 65 decibels, is that enough? Or is that balance still off? And are you making these things policy, or are they one-off gestures? And so we're still struggling with those questions. So this is where I usually talk about other things like federal legislation, community complaints across the country, and state legislation. But we have Adam Smith, Mike Pelliciotti, and Chris McCann, and they're going to cover that stuff, and it's going to be fantastic. I'm only going to finish up here with a couple quick notes about our wonderful state legislative delegation. Senator Kaiser, Senator Wilson, our representatives Orwell, Gregerson, Pelliciotti, and Reeves, and that covers both the 30th and the 33rd. They have been all over aviation issues the last several years. hero work, including this new airport siting. Imagine that 2 years ago. We're going to work on getting a new airport. And that ultrafine particle study is underway, which is exciting. We talked about that. And this is the bill. By the way, it's going to pass. We have till Sunday to get it to pass. But it went through the Senate 45-1, and it went through the House 96-0. This is for siting the new airport. We've never had that kind of support before. So, yay. We have some lawsuits. Not going to go deep. I'm going to say 3 things about lawsuits. One is your city of Burien has done hero work in a very surgical strike to take on the FAA for a particular event happening out of SeaTac that will benefit all of us. And you'll probably hear more about that from Larry Cripe, who's been actively involved in supporting that litigation out of Burien. The key case across the country is something called the City of Phoenix. This is where an airport operator joined the team of the citizens, right? That's the team they chose. The citizens sued the FAA and said, too much frequency, too many flight procedure and path changes, not enough community involvement, and they won in the Federal Court of Appeals. State of Maryland recently chose the side of the citizens, the entire state. At Baltimore, Washington International, Thurgood Marshall, same thing, same issues, and that litigation is going on. So it can be done if we get on the same side of the ledger. So, what are we going to do? We're going to do the usual things that we always say citizens should do. Join your groups, call and complain, follow and join us on social media. Your words matter. Talk to your electeds, write to your electeds, face to face, demand your engagement. But tonight we have something special. We're going to finish with this. It's something called the Accords. You have them in your brochures. This is cool. This is 10 simple agreements in really big letters. Agreements between a local government and its citizens. These are a good tool for translating your knowledge, your new knowledge, into candidate assessments. And start off with some flowery language. You say, recognizing that SeaTac airports, neighbor communities have been and want to be proud hosts and partners, working, living, and playing in harmony and collaboration to support Seattle. Let me translate that for you. We want to work together, and we even want to like each other. And then it goes on to talk about human health and the environment in the airport neighbor communities remains unfairly burdened, et cetera, et cetera. I'll translate that for you. We have some problems. So you get into the Accords, I'm going to talk about one, just the first one. You can work this out on your own down the road. The first Accord, the health and welfare of humans and the environment is a paramount duty and precondition to increase frequency of aircraft operations. Let me translate that for you. First, do no harm. Is it really possible that anyone could disagree with that? Is that really, think about that. Is that just a rhetorical question? Can anyone stand up and say, I disagree, first do no harm? I'm not going to buy into that concept before we go forward. How do you translate that to a question for a candidate? You might ask, would you support reversing the 2018 decision to delete protecting the phrase our quality of life from the port's own bylaws and mission statement? That actually happened. I don't know how it happened. It actually happened. But it's that kind of change that sort of sets an institution free to start ignoring those issues and moving forward with the moonshot, right? So we get worried about that. So take those Accords. They're a tool. They help you elevate aviation impact issues. Attend our candidate forums. Prepare questions for the candidates. Seek their commitments. Say, I want this. Tell me you'll do this. You do that. And then we have to vote. We have to vote. It's 2019. What a weird year. Talk about an off year. It doesn't sound right. These are the 2019 elections. We have to vote. That's what I have for you on the impacts. I'm hoping.
He's not here yet.
Oh, really? We don't have a congressman. We do have a congressman. We do. Timing is everything. I am going to do a quick introduction of our next speaker, our keynote speaker. And it's always nice, when your keynote speaker is here, which we knew he would be. He's on such a tight schedule today, you can't even imagine. But I want to say a few things about our congressman. If you've worked with Representative Adam Smith, or you've seen him in action, or on television, you know that he is thoughtful, intellectually curious. He appreciates complexity and embraces nuance. He brings a unique hybrid, which I love, a deep dive into the policy details, but with a very common sense approach to governance. He understands what it means to have a functioning representative democracy. He can see what is broken and work on how to fix it. We are fortunate, I think, that we have sent this Mr. Smith to Washington. I bet he's never heard that joke. I bet that's never been said before. But I appreciate the response. As you know, he is no peripheral player in our government. He serves as the chairman of the House Armed Services Committee. He is also a leader in the Quiet Skies Congressional Caucus, a group that elevates aviation noise and environmental issues to the forefront of their legislative agendas. Tonight, we're grateful that he's coming to talk to us about issues central to our airport neighbor communities relating to noise and pollution and what he and we can do about it. And he probably has some news. So please join me in a very warm welcome for Congressman Adam Smith.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I think the stage, my daughter was in British dance for a number of years. We were in the Federal Way area, and they always did their big performance here at Highland Performance Arts Center. So I used to see people dancing up here on the stage. Of course, I went to Tye High School, so I know this area really, really well. First thing I want to do is I want to thank you all for your leadership and organization. As the airport has been a fact of my life, my entire life, and for many of us here who have lived in the community, however long we've lived in the community has never been better organized and more focused on trying to improve the quality of life around the airport, and that's thanks to all of you. The organization, the grassroots effort to really make sure your voice is heard is making an enormous difference. You are incredibly knowledgeable on all the ins and outs of the specifics of the issues surrounding the airport and surrounding how it impacts our communities, and you are articulating that message very, very well to the key leaders. Now, we do not have the results yet that we would like, and I know that can be very frustrating. I spent 20 years fighting the third runway, and now I land on it once a week. So it doesn't always work out, but please don't think that what you're doing doesn't matter. It matters profoundly and does have an impact. At a minimum, we have been able to get more money out of the FAA and out of the port to fund noise mitigation for the school district than we would have ever thought possible. And that's largely because the community made its voice heard and was not going to be resistant on that issue. And the same can happen on the broader set of issues that I'm talking about. So your organizations, your efforts, and your voice makes a difference. And we've made one little sort of half step forward in the 30 plus years that I've been working on this, and then we got another big one to make here shortly. And the one sort of half step forward is the Port of Seattle actually gives a damn about this now. Now that's not enough, but back in the 80s, they didn't, okay? I understand the experience you had with the FAA last night or earlier this week where they didn't really seem to care. Well, that was the way the port was in the 80s. Wouldn't listen to us, wouldn't deal with us, there were all kinds of lawsuits. Now you at least have some port commissioners and port officials who want to listen. They're not there yet in terms of implementing the solutions that we would like, but at least we have an interaction with them. And again, that's all credited to the work that you've done to make sure that you will not be ignored, that the voice will be heard. Now the next big step is to get the FAA and the port more committed to solutions. Because as you've seen, the general attitude of the FAA is that airport communities are just sort of a pain in the butt. And you deal with them to the extent you have to deal with them, but you move on, you don't think about it. And that's unacceptable. Okay, that is not the way our government should be treating us. We understand we are not naive. We need airplanes and we need airports. But airports can be a lot more friendly to the communities that surround them than they are now, if they actually tried, if they actually committed to dealing with the issues that come from having airplanes flying over your homes. There's a number of different things that we're trying to do. The biggest one is to really appreciate the impact of noise on communities. And I think you're going to have a presentation here, or may have already had one, about the World Health Organization study. And essentially, what the federal government's regulations are on what noise is acceptable are wrong. There is a far greater impact on communities from persistent noise from airports than they are willing to admit. And if they get to the point where they can admit it, there are some things that they can do. Now, it's not, it's not a panacea, it doesn't make the airplanes go away, but if they spend the money on noise mitigation to help improve the communities around them by acknowledging the impact of 40 decibels and up instead of just 65 and up, there are things they can do, for businesses, for schools, for other things. We can force them to spend more money to make the community safer and better able to do that. We're going to have to continue to force that issue. Towards that end, we're about to reintroduce a bill that I introduced last time, which is on airport communities. And there's a whole bunch of different details to it, but the main point of it is that airports have to listen and include leaders from the communities around them in the discussions about how the airport is operating. That they cannot ignore you. They have to form councils, bring people in so that voice is heard. So if there are some things that can be done, we will at least be heard and have the opportunity to force that. And we put some stuff from the FAA reauthorizing bill last year that sort of nudged us in that direction. We want to move a little bit further. Now, all of that is process, okay? We want to go from process to actual solutions. And I think there are opportunities there. If we can really get the federal government to acknowledge the impact of noise and also to acknowledge the impact of pollution, that's another bill we introduced last week, to get an actual study on the impact of fine particulate matters on airport communities as the airplanes fly over it, burning the fuel and it comes drifting down on us, what is the impact on the health of the community? So we can acknowledge that. And then we talk about what are some of the solutions. Well, as you know, we've been fighting with the FAA for a long, long time to make their flight patterns less impactful on where people live. There's a number of different ways to do that. One is to change the flight patterns so that you're flying over less populated areas, which they have been reluctant to do, and reluctant, frankly, to give straight answers as to why. The general answer basically is, no, we can't do that. Okay, but why? We just can't. And I understand the idea that I'd actually said, it's too complicated for you to understand. I've had people say that to me a lot of times over the years. I was in the story, I was working on a juvenile justice bill, and we were advocating something that the judges thought was absolutely ludicrous. The guy was saying to me, and I kept asking him, okay, well, why? I said, look, it's just really complicated. And I said, actually, I'm smarter than I look. Why don't you give it a try, and we'll see if it makes sense. So we're going to push them on that. Because I think that solution should be available. And then the other issue is how frequently they take off and land, how closely they are connected, and the angle that they come in at. The more quickly they get lowered, the more impactful that is. Can we change that? So there's a lot of different pieces there that we can do, and we need them to embrace the idea that this is something they need to care about. And I want to be realistic about this. I don't want to overpromise on what we can deliver. But the situation we're in right now is they're not even seeing the problem. They're not even willing to acknowledge the depth of the problem. And I believe if they were, there are things that we could do to lessen the impact. But they have to embrace the idea that that's something that needs to happen first. And then the larger issue is, can we reduce the number of planes? And that's really the biggest thing that we could do. And I think there are options for doing that. Beginning with the curfew concept of noise impacts us at all hours of the day. I have memories of, date myself here, Lorraine Hine, a state legislator and mayor of Des Moines way back in the day, and I was at her house one time, and she was right next to Mountaineer High School. And when the 727 would take off, it's like, and then it was like really loud, and that was in the middle of the day, and that wasn't pleasant. But the worst part about it is if it disrupts your sleep. If it's coming in at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, that has a profound healthcare impact on people. We ought to be able to do that, and to do that in this region in particular, we are not making use of all of the different potential assets that we have for takeoffs and landings of airports. It's all been focused on SeaTac. Every other metropolitan area of our size has multiple options for airports. And you don't have any place that I can think of in this country with as many people spread out over the land we do that has one airport right in the middle of everybody that dominates everything. So there ought to be options, particularly when you're talking about cargo. So it's not passengers who are going to want to be here in SeaTac who aren't going to want to take a bullet train from Moses Lake. That was an idea that was kicked around back in the late 80s, early 90s. There is no bullet train from Moses Lake, of course, is part of the problem with that. But cargo, most of the cargo that comes in here is headed east anyway. So if we have a massive airport, and the folks in Moses Lake have been very aggressive about economic development. I've worked with them. There's actually some DoD stuff out there, and they have grown the area significantly in terms of its capacity to accommodate. There's sort of no reason that I can see that more cargo couldn't fly in there and then be shipped out. And that's something that we need to invest in. There are other airports over there. And then with passengers, like we have Paine Field, there's an airport up in Bellingham. There are other options that we really look at it as a regional solution to sort of spread out and reduce the impact. And I'm mindful of the fact that this impacts other communities. And we're going to have to deal with that. But if we can do this in a way so that no community has to absorb flights from, say, 10 o'clock at night to 6 o'clock in the morning, then that is a benefit for all of us, if we could spread out on how they use those takeoffs and landings. And then I think we really need to focus on technology from a pollution standpoint. I'm sure some of you have heard about the controversy surrounding the Green New Deal. It's a largely misunderstood thing. The Green New Deal is a very simple concept, and that is that fossil fuels are killing us. So why don't we figure out how to build an economy that doesn't require them? We have the technology, I believe. We have the ability to invest and learn and grow from that. But in terms of the pollution coming out of airplanes, they are now developing electric airplanes. They don't work like Priuses. They don't actually turn off the engine in the middle of it. But there's technology, and a staggering number of the people who travel out of SeaTac are only going a couple hundred miles away from SeaTac. A lot of the flights are private, and so these are planes that could fly that. They're quieter, non-polluting. We can develop that technology and invest in it. We can also invest in trains. Now, U.S. infrastructure is way behind a number of China numbers notably, but you think of Europe and Asia and what they've done with high-speed trains and high-speed rail, all of that is less impactful on the community, and we can make those investments in an infrastructure package out of Congress that can really reduce the impact. Also, planes can in fact fly on biofuels, which are less polluting. We have to make the investment in developing those biofuels. It's a volume problem. It's not that the planes can't fly on them, it's that we don't have the volume of biofuels to do the work that needs to be done. But the Green New Deal idea is to make investments in those types of technologies so we can get off of it. Also, given the pollution caused by airplanes and the impact of it, we structure our lives so we don't have to travel as much. And this is primarily a business thing. I'm not talking about hitting people individually and saying, no, you can't go to Europe. You're allowed one trip every 10 years. No. It's in business, do you have to make that trip? Or, teleconferencing is amazing now. There's a whole bunch of options to reduce the amount of time that you spend traveling. We should encourage businesses to do that. It saves them money and it's a definite benefit. But it all comes back to acknowledging the problem. I think there's a ton of solutions. There's a number of different things that go. They're not easy. Airline travel is important and difficult. Don't even get me started on how they've changed airline travel. Riding in the back of a 737 on a 5.5-hour flight, that ought to be illegal, believe me. Because I'm not a particularly big guy. There is no room back there. You're like being sort of cow being shipped across country in the back of a truck. That's unrelated to what we're focused on here. But we can change it. But it all stems from the fact that just like we had at the Port of Seattle, which was really frustrating back when we should have addressed this issue in the 80s and 90s by looking at other regional options. And I was there when the legislature did a study, let's try to find another location for a separate airport. And they came back and said, nah, it's got to be CTAC. But the reason they did that was because most areas would be governed by the city. You'd have to go through the local process when you do it. CTAC was not governed by CTAC. It was governed by the port, which is King County. And for the most part, if you weren't right around the airport, King County didn't care about us. I grew up in South King County, and we're where they send all of this favored land uses. So as I put it, 3 garbage dumps in an airport. That's what they did to us. And the Port of Seattle, the ones who were going to decide, they were getting elected based on what they were doing downtown Seattle. We didn't have control over them, so they went the path of least resistance instead of embracing the idea that we need to have a regional airport. So we got to get their attention, we got to get the state's attention, and we got to get the FAA's attention. And the good news is we're not the only community that has this problem. I have colleagues in San Francisco and LA and Chicago and elsewhere who are dealing with the impacts of growing urban suburban areas that are impacted by airports. We need to get the FAA to embrace the idea that part of what they are doing is trying to minimize the impact on people in airport communities. That's not in their mission statement right now. Their mission statement is to make money and fly airplanes. And the impact is something they would just as soon not think about. I again, am very pleased with the effort you've made to force them to think about it. And that's what we're going to do on the federal level as well. And progress is being made, but we've got a lot of work to do going forward. Finally, I want to say is you have a terrific team here of elected officials, both city, state legislators who are absolutely committed to this. And so whatever idea you have, whether it's a statement, we need to be creative. If you come up with an idea that may seem crazy, don't worry about it, talk to us. And maybe it's something that can help us reduce the number of airplanes, that can change the flight pattern, that can reduce the impact. We have a lot of technological options, and there's a ton of money in this region too. If we invest that money in trying to protect our communities, I think that's a good investment. So we need to come up with the ideas to reduce the impact on the people who live here. So I'm absolutely committed to this issue. The airport has been a central fact of my life, literally from when I was born. I tell people I was adopted. I was born in Washington, D.C., so when I was 10 days old, I flew into SeaTac. I landed in SeaTac when I was 10 days old, and that's where my father worked for 32 years, and now I have 3.4 million miles on United Airlines flying back and forth to Washington, D.C. So, I'm sorry, I shouldn't get back to tell one quick joke. My father worked for United for a while because United has gone through some tough times, and just say at the outset that I'm very sympathetic to the people who work there, having gone through 2 bankruptcies. They've lost their pensions, they've lost their pay. It's not a pleasant place to be, but I had a sister-in-law who was a flight attendant for United Airlines for 8 years. And she had a great saying at United. Their unofficial slogan is, "We're not happy until you're not happy." And having flown them for so long, I'm like, now that makes sense. So we have a lot more work to do, but we are so much further than where we were 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, or even 5 years ago, thanks to you. Thanks to organizing and bringing these issues to people's attention. I think we should really, really use that World Health Organization study to say this is the impact you're having. You have an obligation to reduce that impact by any means that are available to us. And that is what I'm committed to working on for you. So keep in touch with us, keep doing what you're doing, keep telling me what you need, and we will do our best to try and help move this forward, because this is where I grew up, the people I represent, and has a huge impact on my constituents. I want to try to lessen that impact as much as possible. Thank you for the chance to address you. I look forward to hearing you.
So while we make a little transition with technology, I want to make a quick introduction, very brief. To my right, Larry Kripe. Larry is a founder of the Burien Quiet Skies Coalition, has been doing great work for 2 years, has been leading the charge with his group, with Debbie Wagner, with others in the litigation in Burien, and just Prince. He's a former Alaska pilot. He's got a lot of knowledge. I've been learning from him. I've been happy to have him be sort of my Obi-Wan on a lot of these issues. And I'm very grateful that he's been of help. And I just want to hand this to you, Larry, so you can make the next introduction. And I'm just so pleased that you're on the team, or that I got to be on your team. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that we have quite a few citizens here from the city of Burien, and there's going to be some questions in our question and answer session at the end, and I'll just announce now. I will give you a short briefing on what we know about our current lawsuit and the situation in the courts. And so when we get to that point, I will share that with you. So I wanted to give you that in advance. So now it's my honor to introduce to you a gentleman by the name of Chris McCann, who is the inventor and developer of this noise button, which is having a tremendous impact all across the country. Chris was supposed to be here live with us this evening, but he had an operation on a knee, and the doctors told him he couldn't fly. So, unfortunately, we're bringing him to you via new technology here, and it's wonderful. So, at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Chris McCann, and he's going to tell you what's going on with the noise button. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. I'm sorry I couldn't join you guys this evening. I had surgery on my knee last Thursday, and the doctors kindly asked me not to fly anywhere for a couple of weeks. But I'm glad to join you through the video here. As the previous speaker said, my name is Chris McCann. I'm the guy who created airnoise.io that several of you may be using currently to file noise complaints. And I'm happy to talk to you tonight about what we're doing, things that are coming up in the near future, and how air noise plays a role in the things that Representative Smith was discussing and trying to get some traction on this problem. Hope if I hit the right button. All right. Just by way of background, I have a little bit of flying experience. I was a test pilot in the Air Force. I served for over 20 years. My last duty was as a test pilot in the U-2. I've got a lot of combat time flying the U-2 over various inhospitable places around the world. So I know airplanes well, and I certainly love airplanes. But now I decided to take an orthogonal path when I retired from the Air Force about 10 years ago. I'm a software developer consultant for a local consulting company here in La Jolla, California. This air noise thing I do is completely on the side. It's basically my second job, just because there's a need for it, and I really enjoy the work that I do on it. But this is really by way of introducing myself, so you know I have a background in flying, as well as software, which I brought the two together to create air noise. But I do want to make a couple quick disclaimers. First, I am not anti-airplane or anti-airline or anti-growth or anti-airport. I love flying, and I'm sure like the rest of you, I'm in favor of having safe and efficient, convenient travel available to me to go to the places I want to go. I don't think there are many folks who would disagree with that statement. But again, as Representative Smith mentioned, quality of life is not something that should be removed from charters of public organizations who are impacting people's lives. Our airports and the decision makers who run them, people have to be considered in the equation, especially people who live under the departure and arrival passes. I'm sure many of you do. The FAA and people like Representative Smith are in a position to consider the needs of the citizens, not just the airlines and the aircraft manufacturers. So I just want to put that disclaimer out there. I am not a Luddite when it comes to technology. We're just looking for reasonable accommodation, and air noise is here to try to do that. So people often ask me why air noise. I live in La Jolla. We don't necessarily have an airport noise problem where I live. We're about 12 miles from the airport. But I started noticing in the fall of 2016 that my neighbors started to complain about all the airport noise. I started looking into it. I started attending meetings in early 2017, put on by the San Diego County Regional Airport Authority. I discovered the problem was that people were getting more noise along the coast, but they were also having trouble making noise complaints. And the airport authority was having trouble getting actionable information from people. They would receive a lot of emails that said, there was a loud airplane over my house last night, which really isn't much that they could do about that. As I got more involved in this, I realized a lot of the problems people were describing were being caused by the FAA's NextGen Airspace Modernization Project, which has some very admirable goals, but the way it's being applied is putting most of the burden on a small group of people. And that's when I really got keyed into this. I kind of concluded that the people who are suffering the most from the problem also had pretty much the least hand in creating the problem, yet all of the burden was falling on them to try to fix it. And that's you and me and all the people who were impacted by this. So with, like most good criminals, there was motive, there was opportunity here, and that's where Air Noise was born. And the idea was simply to make it easier for people to file noise complaints, to not make it a burden on their daily life, and also for the people receiving the data, the Port Authority, the Airport Authority, provide them actionable, detailed data so they can try to fix the problem. It's not about complaining, it's about solving the problem. So what are we trying to do at Air Noise? This just came out of a local need. It was more of a necessity as a mother of invention thing. I had no intention of growing this, of it taking off, of anybody else using it but my neighbors and friends in San Diego. But it turns out there is a need all over the place. And what we do is create an independent record of noise complaints. When you file a noise complaint through Air Noise, all the data that's collected about the airplane, its route of flight, the time, the date, the altitude, how close it was to you, all that information is stored in our servers. Also, we submit those noise complaints to the public authority, whether it's the Airport Authority, or in your case, the Port of Seattle. We submit those complaints into the public record. Because they're submitted into the public record, and because we have a duplicate copy of those complaints, we can verify that the Airport Authority is receiving all the complaints that people are filing, and that they're actually doing something with that data. Since we put the data in the public record, it allows us to engage our elected officials, and I'm very excited to see you guys having your congressman show up, because this is a key factor to getting traction and solutions to this problem. Once it becomes a public record, it becomes subject to freedom of information requests and public records requests. There's no disputing that the information about the complaints and the impact these flight paths are having is collected, because it's public agencies that are collecting the data. So we give them the data, and we keep a copy so we can verify it, and now we can point at those records and say, look, thousands upon thousands of complaints are being filed. There is a problem that needs to be addressed here. The other point of this was to raise awareness and engagement in communities all over the place. I started it here, but within a few weeks of it starting, I was getting emails from people in Boston who read something about it in Facebook. That's how the people in Seattle came to find me. There's a need all over the place, even in other countries, Canada, the UK, these other places have reached out as well. It's not a uniquely American problem, but we did start trying to solve it here. The end goal of all of this is just to restore the quality of life. There has to be a balance when it comes to airplanes like this giant Airbus over the house in the picture. We shouldn't have to suffer that 24/7, especially for people who have lived in areas that have historically not been impacted by airport noise. A lot of people who are, for lack of a better word, haters, and people who don't understand the situation always say, well, if you don't like the noise of the airport, you shouldn't live near an airport. Well, I have news for you. There are people that live in Idlewild, California, 107 miles from LAX, and they are getting unbearable aircraft noise because of the change in flight path over them, and because of the topography of the mountains they live in. So it is not people moving near airports who are complaining about this just to be great. Another question people always ask is it working? I had someone email me this week. She said, I've been filing complaints and I don't see any changes to my neighborhood. I checked on her account and she's been on for 2.5 weeks and had filed 15 complaints. I am glad that she sees air noise as having so much impact that we could do something that quickly, but that's just not how it works. NextGen took nearly 2 decades to design and implement, and it's not going to take us a month or a week or even a year to change it. And we're not trying to change it. We're not trying to scrap NextGen. We're trying to get reasonable accommodation for the people who are negatively impacted when they could have done an actual environmental impact study and alleviated a lot of these problems. Where is it working? Well, here in San Diego, because of the noise complaints that were generated, about 99% of them through air noise, Ouiet and some other communities now have voting seats on the Airport Noise Advisory Council. We also motivated the Airport Authority here to fund multiple studies at the area around the airport and inside the 65 decibel level and outside to try to make some accommodations and suggestions to the FAA to change flight procedures. The people in Lake Arrowhead who moved miles away from the city center of LA to get peace and quiet had the FAA move an arrival to Ontario, which is used almost exclusively by FedEx and UPS in the middle of the night, over their neighborhoods. And since they're already at 6,000 feet elevation in the mountains, these airplanes were barely 3,000 feet above their heads. Because they had detailed data they could share with the FAA and a lot of people filing complaints, the FAA is now in talks with them to do something. The Port Authority in New York, New Jersey, as well as Congressman Swazi, are also engaging, mostly because of the efforts of people on the island. And the city of Culver City near LA decided to join a lawsuit with their citizens because they had lots of data to point out the problem, including the details of the airplanes and why they were impacting people who weren't impacted previously. We also get lots of reactions by airport authorities across the country. I'm happy to say now, if complaints are going into an airport authority system from air noise, if they decide to make a change to that complaint system that they think might interrupt the flow of complaints, they are now reaching out to me proactively. In fact, the Los Angeles World Airports just did that for LAX and for the Van Nuys Airport about 2 weeks ago. So I think they're recognizing that people now have a tool at their disposal, a tool to prove that they're being bothered by this problem. They're not just cranky people who have nothing better to do. They're people with children and lives and jobs, and they're just trying to get some redress from the government. But because people now have a mechanism for being heard that doesn't cost them hours of their time, airport authorities around the country are having to actually deal with these people, hear their complaints, and seek some solutions. So I do feel we're having a positive impact. It's not happening as fast as anybody would like, but it's definitely happening. So just before I got onto this call, here's a stat. There have been 2.2 million complaints filed through air noise just in the last 24 months. We're up to around 12 to 13,000 every day, and we have 42 airports nationwide now. And some of those are new, and I'll go over that in a minute. One of the things I was asked before joining the call was if I could explain some of the new things that are in air noise, and I'm more than happy to do that. One of the issues that I've noticed as I've been involved with this problem is that airport authorities, as soon as the raw complaint numbers start to increase, they try to change the numbers. There's an old saying, any fool can lie with statistics. Well, the port authority, or should say the airport authority down here, did that. When the complaint numbers skyrocketed by a factor of 10, they changed how they reported the complaint numbers for the first time in 12 years. They started reporting unique households complaining each month instead of the number of complaints. Part of the problem is engaging our neighbors and our friends in this activity. Some of us are a little more ardent about it, a little more motivated for change. Some folks are bothered by it, but not bothered sufficiently to do something. So Quiet Circle is something I came up with that allows your neighbors who live very close to you within a quarter mile, that when you file a complaint, up to about 15 times a month, they'll get an email that says, hey, Chris filed a noise complaint on this jet. Would you like to also file one if you were bothered by that airplane? All they have to do is hit reply to the email and send. And the system automatically files a noise complaint for them. The assumption is they live close to you, they're impacted by the same noise. If they heard it, if it bothered them, if it woke them up as well, then they are more than welcome to file a noise complaint. It's free to them, it's free to you. The idea is simply to expand the circle of engagement, and we're looking for quiet, hence the name Quiet Circle. If you sign up for Quiet Circle, you'll see something like this. You can invite your neighbors to come join you. You can see if they're filing complaints. It's super easy for your neighbors to opt out. Again, there's no cost to do this, but if they want to not be involved with it anymore, they can opt out and you can't really invite them back in. Try to find the lightest touch possible because people are sometimes really hard to motivate. Another thing that I've added that just went in live yesterday is a new support system. We've added a special service called Intercom to Air Noise, and you'll see on any page of Air Noise when you're logged in a little blue circle with kind of a smiley face in the bottom. This is a way to better engage people if they're having trouble filing complaints, have questions about how the system works. I was basically spending almost all of my free time answering support requests, trying to help people, instead of adding the cool features that I think will help us move this issue forward and make it easier for people to do so. So if you see that little blue icon on the bottom and you click it, a pop-up will come up and it'll allow you to start a conversation with me or one of the other folks I have helping me with this. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. This way I won't lose track of somebody who's having a problem in the flurry of email that comes in every single day. So you'll see that. The other part of this is there's going to be a new help center that comes out of Intercom as well, with articles on how to set up your button, how to troubleshoot things, if you have questions in general about how it works, what altitude is shown, for example, on a complaint, why do airplanes not get found sometimes. All of these questions are going to be answered in articles that we're loading into the system now. All right, another thing we've added is called any aircraft search. It took me a while, and I apologize that I had a blind spot for this. As an airplane guy who can detect and identify airplanes almost sight unseen by the noise they make, I thought surely anyone who hears an airplane over their head will know whether it's a commercial jet or a helicopter or something else. Turns out that's not the case. especially late at night, if it's dark, if it's cloudy. So we have added a system now called Any Aircraft Search, which adds a little icon to the dashboard page where you file complaints from the website, which if you click that button, it will look for any kind of airplane near you. And if it finds one, it will file the complaint on whatever type it finds. You don't have to know that it was a Southwest jet or a police helicopter or your neighbor with his old Cessna. It will find any airplane near you that's broadcast to EDSB or that can be found in FlightAware. So that's on there now. If you have a button and you single click it, that will also trigger an any aircraft search. And I know it almost sounds like anti-aircraft, and I don't mean that, it's any aircraft. I got actually a call from the Seattle Port Authority probably 9 months ago asking a question about the altitudes that were being reported in the complaints. The altitudes come from the airplane's ADSB broadcast. It's a digital broadcast from the aircraft. I thought I was using the correct altitude for a long time. I had another user recently complain that he had sent his information to the JFK folks, and they did a line-by-line comparison of the altitudes in air noise, the altitude they had in their radar traces, and they showed a discrepancy of a couple hundred feet. I did some more research, and I found there is another altitude that could be used that is actually much closer to the altitude that's supported by the FAA, so I've included that now, and that's a change I just made. So what's next for air noise? Soon you will be able to automatically have your complaints sent to the FAA Ombudsman's office, or anyone else, frankly, by email. So the FAA is going to get them directly. You'll be able to send the complaints, digest of your complaints to your member of Congress. Sorry, Representative Smith, you're still there, but these will be coming through the Communicating with Congress system. And these are all opt-in, they don't happen automatically. You'll be able to simultaneously detect and complain on multiple aircraft. So if you live off the end of the runway, between the runways, this will pick up multiple airplanes one at a time. Also, we're looking at a new button that is rechargeable, is cellular, instead of Wi-Fi based, and GPS aware. I'm in early discussions with the people to make those. Realize that having to buy a new button every time the battery dies is a pain. That's just the way Amazon made them, but we're working on that as well. What's new for Seattle? I know my time is getting short, so let me go through these quickly. How about we add some new airports to Seattle? How about we add Payne Field? How about we add Renton? How about we add Going Field? All three of these are currently in test. As soon as I'm satisfied the system is working well with them, we will add those three, so it'll be a total of 4 in Seattle. You'll be able to report to all 4 simultaneously. So if you file a complaint, the airplane is in or out of Going Field, that's where the complaint will go. If it can't figure it out, it'll send it to CTAC. Also, CTAC reached out to me recently and asked if I could integrate their Symphony Public View system. I am considering that. There are other cities that Air Noise integrates with, including Boston, that use the same system. The one downside of using this system is it requires a login in their system in order for your complaints to be submitted. This isn't a showstopper. You can use it in Orlando and Boston, some other places, but it would be a change from how we currently do business. I'm working on a way to automate that process to help get people logged in quicker. And that's it. I had to race through that. It was a brief introduction to Air Noise, what we're trying to do, why we're doing it, and what you can expect in the future. And at this point, I'll stop talking.
It is now time to hear a state legislative update. And if I didn't mention this before, it is not a good time for our state legislators to drive all the way up here from Olympia to talk to us because they're in the heart of it. It's all happening now, and it's going to happen through Sunday. But we're so appreciative that, and we actually did a twofer, as I understand it. I think this is correct. We have our representative from the 33rd District, Mike Melichai, is going to come talk to us. We also may have, if I understand, Tina Orwell, who drove up from Olympia to talk to us, and they may be coming up together. So if they are in the house now, this would be the time. Otherwise, we'd like to listen to me talk some more. So hopefully, here they come up in the way.
You know, I had a chance. My name is Mike Pelliciotti. I represent the 30th Legislative District, which includes Federal Way in the southern part of Des Moines. And I'm thrilled that Representative Tina Orwell, who many of you know as well, who represents the 33rd Legislative District, is joining us as well. But, you know, I don't think we've had a full opportunity to give a round of applause to Steve Edmonston. You know, sometimes it's a challenge when actually I'm seeing the event, you don't necessarily get the recognition that you deserve. But Steve and Sheila and so many friends who have come together to bring together the League of Quiet Skies voters are really making a difference. And I know it's made it a lot easier for Representative Orwell and me in Olympia to do the work that we're doing, because I always get energized when I come to an event like this and see so many members of the community coming together, because at the end of the day, I've only been in elected office now for about 2 years, but I've come to really appreciate the importance of the squeaky wheel. And really, people coming together and uniting around particular issues is where we start seeing the change that we want to see. And you know, what I think would be helpful is we kind of talk a little bit about what's going on in Olympia right now, some of the things we've been working on, and actually a quick update just from today and some of the good work that Representative Orwell's doing. You heard from some of the presentations earlier, there is, to be sure, a more limited role that the state government has in this. Obviously, the Port of Seattle is intimately involved in these issues, as you heard, and obviously, as you heard from Congressman Smith, the FAA and the federal government has most of the regulatory scheme. But one of the things is always frustrating to me about government can sometimes be it's not me go talk to that part of government. Or, you know, go to the board, you need to talk to the state. Or go talk to the state, you need to talk to the federal government. And one of the things that I'm committed to doing when we address these issues is making sure that there are no roadblocks within the state government for bringing about the type of reforms that we need to see done. And you know, one of the big things is the need for expansion of airplane traffic to areas outside of our community. And you know, we heard a little bit from Congressman Smith when he was talking about the desire to move things to Grant County for cargo traffic, for example, moving things to Painfield for more commercial traffic. But I'd love to hear from Representative Orwell, who's been really leading the charge of trying to make sure that we lead at the state level to start getting airplane traffic outside of our area. Representative Orwell.
Well, it's such an honor to be
Give
here.
her a round of applause.
I need to thank the good gentleman from the 30th. He has been amazing to work with and team up on these issues, as well as Senator Kaiser and Representative Mia Gregerson. And we really are a team. And I also want to say, just to re-emphasize, I can't say thank you enough to Steve and Sheila and all the community leaders here, because it really is a partnership and we couldn't do it without you. So thank you again. So one of the updates we have, and it's actually an update that actually has an update from this afternoon, is we've been working on citing another commercial airport in our state. And this is really important to start the process because, as you can imagine, it'll take years to get another one up and running. But there's some really good news. And again, I have to, Senator Kaiser has the Senate bill and I had the House bill, and we've teamed up in conference to actually find the right language. But here's the good news. We're not alone. There's other legislators from Moses Lake that are incredibly interested in having another commercial airport potentially sited in their community. So we really teamed up with them this session. And so this afternoon we were also meeting with Senator Sedana and the representatives from Moses Lake, and we came to agreed language on this committee that's going to pick 3 sites and eventually be reduced down to 1 site of where we could see a second commercial airport. So this is a big step, and it's nice to see not only are we moving a bill, but we're moving it in partnership with other parts of the state. So I think it's a good start, and hopefully we'll have the final votes on that tomorrow, and that'll be on its way to the governor soon.
You know, one of the things that, you know, we've heard from presentations and we're hearing about, one of the challenges is the concentrated aspect of airplane traffic that I know so many of us experience. And with that, you know, while the volume might not reach to certain decibels, what we know is the volume is increasing and it's more concentrated. And so one of the things that to me has been a really inherent injustice is when those airplane routes have been essentially concentrated over certain routes. Well, sure, that affects fewer people, but for the people it affects us in a much greater way. And so one of the things that I've been trying to do is make sure, again, that there are no limitations in state law to make sure that those of us who are affected by airplane traffic and the volume of airplane traffic, that there are no legal limitations in place. And part of that has been introducing a bill to make it so that we can expand the mitigation zone so that when, what is my hope is nationally there's a recognition of addressing issues related to decibel noise so that the current contour in which the FAA determines mitigation can ultimately be expanded. And when that happens, I want to make sure there are no limitations in place related to state mitigation requirements that won't allow for the full amount of mitigation to be provided. And that's one of the things that I continue to work on. We've passed in the House this bill that Representative Orwell and I co-sponsored in the House. We passed that out of the House with, I think it was about 55 votes out of the House of 98 votes. Got it through the Senate Local Government Committee. It's currently on the floor of the State Senate. And if we don't get that passed this year, that's certainly something I want to continue to push forward. But pushing forward is really the key, and making sure we're continuing to make sure that these issues are addressed. And that, like I said, any limitations, all that exist within state law are being addressed. But one of the things that Representative Orwell has really been working on is making sure that the impact is actually being correctly quantified. And so that when there has been studies done elsewhere, that we're doing our own independent studies at the state level to identify that. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I'm going to say is, on the two studies I'm going to talk about, we really partnered with our cities, and I know a lot of our city folks are here. Can you stand up? Can we acknowledge you for your work? So I was approached, I guess it's been a couple years, by a couple constituents in Norman Park. They may be here tonight, Rose. Well, Rose is in Burien, and Stewart from Norman Park, about the incident of asthma in our area. And I raised my family in this area, and I always had my son used to come home sick from Mar Vista all the time, and I always thought there's mold in that school, and it never really occurred to me these kids playing outside might be exposed to the airplane pollution, and that may have been part of the asthma that not only my son but other children in our area experience. And so one of the things we realized when working with Stewart and Rose is that the University of Washington actually had been doing research around ultrafine particles in airports, and they had done research at LAX and Atlanta, and so it was really quite helpful that we had expertise in our own community. And of course, I was very excited. My alma mater was working on this. And so we did go to the legislature, and again, we teamed up. We all teamed up on this, and Mike was a huge lead on this, as well as getting additional money from the state to have the University of Washington do an ultrafine particle study. And they've almost completed that study. It was a year and a half in duration and finishes in June. And they'll be coming up with recommendations on the next steps. And I think there's some really incredible opportunities with this. I think noise has an enormous impact, but I think pollution does too. And really understanding these ultrafine particles, which aren't regulated by the FAA or the EPA, but are so easily absorbed into our bodies. And again, we heard in that earlier movie about inflammation diseases, and again, these may be another trigger for those type of diseases. So one of the things we've done, and I think it's in the Senate budget, and I hope it'll be in the final one, is to start getting money for the Department of Health to really start looking at health conditions around the airport, as we have the footprint that the University of Washington is doing around the levels of ultrafine particles. And so they also will be coming out with a full report in June, and we'll be able to move forward next session on those recommendations. The other study that is going on right now is, and again, the cities were big contributors on this. They teamed up with the state to look at an airport impact, and that's looking at noise, environment, a whole array of things that impact our communities having a major airport. And so they're just in the process. I don't know if there's anyone here from Commerce. I think they had opened up to hire a consultant. They had one apply, and they're just trying to finalize that. So again, we'll have a lot more information gathered. But to me, it's not just about gathering information. It's about what are the next steps, right? We want to know what actually could be taken. Ultrafine, do we need the use of biofuels? Do we need different filtration systems in our homes? what do we need to be doing? And so the hope of all these studies is they're going to give us marching orders, and we'll probably need to, again, partner with our cities and the state and the federal to move forward.
And so, we'll stop at that because I know we want to stay on schedule, but I want to thank Steve for the opportunity for us to join you. And one of the things that, again, energizes me is just so many people coming together as we continue to work on these issues. So please give all of yourselves a round of applause. Thank you so much.
Yes, I told you I would give you a quick update. And first of all, our relationship with the city council and our city manager and our city attorney could not be working better than it is. They've kept us well informed and kept us in the loop and allowed us to even participate in the writing and maybe not the writing, but input into the briefs as they're being written. The latest thing is the 2 rounds of briefs that are submitted to the court in the Ninth Circuit in San Francisco have been submitted, and because of the federal government being closed, they got behind, and there's an extension asked by the FAA, and the last rounds of briefs by them will be submitted by the court probably in maybe the next month or 2. We're not sure. There's no firm date yet. After that is done, the clerks at the Ninth Circuit Court will put the project together, and our court date, we are told as of 2 days ago, could be even 4 to 6 months down the road. So it's not going to be anything that's going to be happening quickly, but I will tell you we are in good hands. We've done a fabulous job. We never know what the outcome is going to be, but we're diligent, we're on top of it, our city is on top of it, and as Steve told you earlier, the outcome of this can impact our entire community in Puget Sound. And so we will continue to keep you updated, and so now we can start answering questions. Thank you very much.
In the meantime, while we're waiting for questions, I have one. You'll regret staying 10 minutes. No. The bill that you talked about, Representative Pellicciati, about the extension of this ability of the Port of Seattle to expend funds all the way to the southern boundary of Federal Way so we can sweep in a much larger group of citizens into mitigation. Understand that a lot of things have to happen even if the bill passes before we get there, but it sort of lays this groundwork. It seems like there's still this conceptual issue, and it was discussed a lot tonight, about leaving 65 DNL behind as old science and understanding that mitigation is required at 45. You saw 45 or 40. I think the community has a struggle right now trying to figure out how to get everybody on the same page. That's something that we could shoot for. And I don't know if you just have any thoughts. I mean, we're here as voters trying to figure out what should we do? How do we advocate? How do we push buttons better? Not just the air noise complaint button, but to really get that to be the centerpiece of the conversation.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think that a lot of the challenges, and we heard this from the presentation earlier from Chris McCann, a lot of the issues that we're having with NextGen related to a lot of the way traffic's being redirected is not necessarily unique to our area. And so part of kind of the longer term view that I guess I have related to is I truly believe that what's happening here is also happening in other parts around the country. And I am optimistic that what we'll see, as you were mentioning as voters, what we'll see in congressional elections is a greater awareness by congressional candidates as to the importance of this issue. So what you'll have, hopefully in a bipartisan way, is you'll have folks who are representing areas that are affected by airplane traffic. And then it's no longer going to be one of 15 or 20 issues that's important, but it's going to be a top issue that I think we'll see in a bipartisan way. And so part of my hope is that pressure is going to take place in Congress and ultimately take place with the FAA to really revisit the way a lot of these calculations have been done. And that's part of why I've been working at the state level to make sure that the legal frameworks and mitigation zones are in place so that if there is an expansion of a lot of these issues at the federal level, that we are well prepared as a community to respond to them.
Pending questions arriving. I'm going to throw one down to Debbie Wagner at the end. Debbie, you've been actively involved, I believe, on the ultrafine particle Noise Study Committee. You've been a member of that, right? On the
advisory panel. Thank you to Tina Orwell, who recommended that I
Could you give us a thumbnail of your impressions right now of where it is, and when do we expect to have confirmation? When do they think the study will be done? And given what we already know, are we safe in saying anything, or where do you think we are right now?
I think that they've determined that there are ground level impacts from aircraft overflying communities. So as to where those impacts are, they seem to move depending on winds and the altitude of the aircraft. But because they happen at all, the way that you are supposed to take care of worst case scenario is that all of it should be mitigated if it ever might be affected. So the primary questions are no longer, is it there, and where is it at, or how bad is it? It's what is it doing to people, and what does mitigation look like? So I think we're at the point of having acknowledged that it's there, it's happening, it's sporadic or it's constant, it's here or it's there, and we need to do something about it. So I'm looking for the Port of Seattle to start talking about what might be some creative solutions in mitigating this impact on people, especially children who want to spend a lot of time outdoors. Children are developing, their lungs are delicate. The damage that exposure to pollution as a child can be permanent. And lung structure damage will affect their health, their growth, and their entire lifetime. So I'm looking for ideas for creative solutions on this and next steps for the UW study, which one I would very much like to see is evaluating the health of people that may be impacted by this and see what's happening.
Thank you. A couple of questions that I think they're somewhat related. I'm just going to say them, and then maybe someone wants to jump in and answer. One is a question that is acknowledging that on an annualized basis, the Port of Seattle collects over $70 million in tax revenue from King County. And it has only really been in the most recent history, like this year, that it appears that money is going to start being used for airport neighbor cities and mitigation purposes. In other words, it's been used for other things. That's a big step, that acknowledgement, that sort of understanding that it can be used. I think there's a concern that, without making policy to use it, we don't know how that's going to go. Is there anything that can be done, and maybe it's a question for our state legislature, I don't know if the state legislature can do that, to sort of not just say, oh, pretty please, but is there more that can be done to sort of be more, is there legislation that can kind of create a directive that these tax revenues that are not bound by federal regulations can be used for mitigation?
Well, I certainly think the state should be in dialogue with the port, and I say that because it's a state that gives the port their taxing authority.
Yes.
And so there is a connection for us to sit down, and I think it'll be very timely when we have the results for the ultrafine particle study and we start looking at what the mitigation is. That will be a prime opportunity to start having those conversations.
Okay, so here's a question, which I think it came up early, came up in my talk, and it's come up several times. Can we do anything to get the Port of Seattle to add quality of life back into their sort of thinking and planning process? I can think of some things, but anybody want to address kind of how we might address that issue, literally to say, as advocates, please put it back into your bylaws and your mission, that you're here, that your work for growth is dependent on our quality of life.
I'm going to take that because at recent Port Commissioner meetings, they're quite dumbfounded that it's not even there. I don't even think they realized it was taken out. So they're here, they're listening, and I believe, it is my belief and trust in the Port Commissioners, that they will add it back in. Because this group of Port Commissioners do not know why it was taken out. It was taken out. The suggestion to remove it was by a former Port Commissioner who's no longer a commissioner. But that is my trust and belief that they will put it back in, because you can watch public comment when it is brought up, And there is a nod of the head no and bewilderment that it was even removed.
So this might be a follow-on to your report on the lawsuit. It's just more of a question. You know, I think, and I hope there are a lot of people that have come tonight that, you know, all you're bringing here is the awareness that something's going on above your head. It doesn't seem right. It doesn't seem like it was 5 years ago. And you don't know anything else. You're sort of, this is your first step. This is your foray. And I hope you're here, because a lot of this is just to sort of welcome you to the movement and talk about all the things that can be done. This question, though, I think is a great one, because it's just really back at that you know, I'm noticing something, and the question is, what about all these extra flights that are now suddenly turning left over Burien, now turning right as they take off over Des Moines, and we didn't used to have those before. Obviously, that's the underpinning, the factual underpinning, but maybe you could just talk a little bit about what it used to be and what it is now. So not the lawsuit so much as just what actually has happened.
Well, in the many years that I flew out of SeaTac Airport for over 25 years, the departure corridors were out runway heading into the north. It was out through the Duwamish corridor through Elliott Bay, and that was the standard profile. And when we took off to the south, we followed runway heading and climbed to 10,000 feet or whatever altitude that we were climbing to an altitude before we were being turned on our departures. Now, because of the intense congestion of the airport, they started the slower flying turboprop airplanes and turning them out over the city of Burien to the north, but they're doing the same thing to the south over the city of Normandy Park and Des Moines, and routes that were never there before. And so they're moving these airplanes out of the way. And nearly 3 years ago, it'll be in August, that I stood before the council and said, something drastic has changed. And that's when I brought it to their attention. And I said on that very day, in August of 2016, I said, it's turboprops today, it will be jets tomorrow. And if we don't put a stop to this, that's what's going to happen. And I told the FAA they could carve a stone on the side of the building that they would never do it. And I don't believe it. Because once a corridor is established, and it's like you've seen the picture of me, that they got this runway, they built a fourth runway, they just didn't pour any concrete. And they really built it off of both ends of the runway, turning east and west, but kicking airplanes out. And I think that that's our biggest fear, is that's what they're going to go to.
So, I think it's 8 o'clock, and we want to honor everyone's time. And you know, it's a 2-hour program from 6 to 8. I think we can stay for a few more minutes. We have some more questions to answer. But I also want to acknowledge, you know, babysitters getting up early in the morning and those kind of things. And so it is definitely not rude. By the way, it's dark. I can't see anything anyway, so I wouldn't know if you left or we might be talking to empty chairs. We don't really know up here. But I want to acknowledge that it's 8 o'clock. I have this question. I think this is a good one. And I think this is something that we all have to grapple with, and I think it's fair. And I think we may all have something to say about this. But, you know, the question is, why does the port push so hard for growth? We have full employment in the economy. Jobs are not needed. We do need housing of all kinds. We need infrastructure. We need environmental assistance. We need ground transportation. There's a lot of needs. And I think that the sort of simple version of that is, you know, we recognize that there is this tremendous growth economic engine, and jobs are important. Are we still in a position where we can find balance? Is that still possible? Or has, since 1945, if you think of a scale of just a scale, has the balance actually all been about growth and not about safety and health and the environment? And what can we still do? Having said that, I think, you know, the congressman has said this. I think all of us on this table would say, no one's here to shut down the airport. That's not the agenda. But I think the agenda might be to take a breath. So I think the question is, why is it always about growth, growth, growth? Should we change that question, and how do we change that? How do we make that change? Anybody want to jump in?
I'd like to hear from that if they can implement the change.
There you go.
Well, look,
10 minutes you didn't want to stay.
No, this is great. Look, I think, again, this is why this is so important that we not only come together for this, but that the cities are present, because the mission for the various entities that have a lot of influence in this area are not necessarily focused on the impact of that growth. And what I mean by that is, well, the FAA, they're focused on safety, right? They're trying to find no, hold on a second. They're finding the paths for different flights and different things like that. They're not thinking about the impact of noise impact or other issues like that. Port of Seattle, well, like any economic port institute, they're focused on the economic growth and the economic development that they are doing. And we've talked about the importance of making sure that the community voices are heard that are affected, so that we can temper the impact that's taking place. Because unless there is a response from the community, from elected officials that represent the area, and like I go back to what I was saying, that squeaky wheel approach, unless that is taking place, the other driving factors will be leading the direction that things go. And so that's why it's so important that we focus on the issues, in my mind, both in terms of mitigation, but also in terms of being voices to our elected representatives in Congress, and ultimately directing them to make sure they're communicating to the FAA as to the impact that's taking place. Because, and part of that's also the litigation that's taking place as well. Because the systems aren't set up in a way to allow for the community voices to be heard as to the negative impacts that are coming from that economic growth. And I think this is important. So that the community, that's part of the reason why you see the community coming together on this issue, because there isn't necessarily the mechanism to take place or to see the change otherwise. And so I think, obviously, we're starting to recognize where there's progress to be made, but it's coming more organically, both from the community, from the cities, through litigation, and then ultimately where we can at the state level to make sure that the laws are consistent with community needs.
And I think that was really well said. And I do think that when you look at the state perspective, yes, the state's worried about economic growth, but they're also worried about the health and safety of everyone in the state, and trying to balance those things. One of the things that we looked at early on was the community agreements. A lot of areas in the country, like Orange County and Denver, had these community agreements that didn't allow for night flights and other things, and somehow we were never grandfathered into that. But again, trying to see what are those opportunities, through the meetings we're having with the port and with the cities and with the federal level to kind of create those for our community, because I think that's the buffer we need around the health of all of us. So
I'll just pitch in, and I've been asking questions. I'll pitch in at least an observation on the subject. Is I think also it's important as we look at sort of this balance, this notion that it's important to have growth and jobs in our economy. And we all agree with that. But we also have to look and be realistic about what the numbers really are. I mean, if you live in the city of SeaTac, and I don't know what their number is, but the economic benefit to the city of SeaTac, which surrounds the airport, is phenomenal. It's a huge number. I can't remember what it is, but it would blow your mind. But if you go to the city of Des Moines, kind of the canary in the coal mine, remember we saw the slide with the plume, what appeared to be, if predicted, a plume of these soot deposits, these ultrafine particles. There are 30,000 citizens in the city of Des Moines. And if we're looking at a trade-off, a balance, an economic benefit, according to the Port of Seattle's last economic benefit study, 721 residents in the city of Des Moines had a port-related job. So now those jobs may be supporting a family, So it's more than 721 people, and any economist would tell you there's a multiplier, and so it's a little bit more than that. But I think we have to be realistic when we start to say that untethered growth is fine because we need this in our economy, when the real numbers are we have 29,000 and change citizens who are all burdened by aviation overflights, and a very, very small number of citizens who are receiving that economic benefit. It seems to me, this is personal, not speaking for any organization, so far out of whack that this notion of balance is probably the worst argument the port would ever want to bring up in public. Because if we look at the real numbers outside of the city of SeaTac. Okay. Go ahead.
So we're not going to have time to reply to all your questions, but I sincerely thank you for your questions. And some of them were written directly to Congressman Adam Smith, and we will make sure that we forward them to his office so that they can reply properly. But we also have a website, and it is the League of Quiet Skies Voters.org, and we abbreviated it to www.LOQSB.org. And we will put in your questions, and we will respond. Your questions mean that much to us, and I appreciate you sticking around to hear us. It's really weird not being able to see you. I can hear you. And are you going to do another question? But we have a stack of the podium we're not going to get to.
We're not going to get to. Why don't we do this? Why don't we honor everybody's time? I'm sure that as we break down, if people want to come and ask questions, I know that we'll be sticking around for a while. We can do it that way. I'm sure they won't throw us out of here in the next 15 minutes. Larry, do you want to say something?
One last thing before I let you go, and this is always a hard thing to talk about, but when it talks to, somebody wanted to know why we collect money. Well, the money is to pay for printing costs and all the little costs that just add up over time, and we appreciate any and all donations that are given. We're fully accountable, and we pass out envelopes. You can send money in that way. It goes to the PO box we collected, or on your way out. But any money that you contribute is just highly appreciated, and we thank you very much.
So I'm going to adjourn this meeting of the League of Quiet Skies voters formally. We'll hang out. I'm going to ask that we allow our representatives to go see their families and get some sleep, or go back to Olympia and vote, or whatever it is they do. Because I know you're burning the midnight. You're going 24/7 right now. And we just so appreciate that you took the time to come up and talk to us today. Thank you. Let's give them a round of applause. Thank you all for coming. Have a great evening.